Lesson are introduction, wind, air pressure, thunderstorms, cyclones, tornado, and safety measures. Have you ever noticed what happens to the flag when it is hoisted? After the flag is hoisted, what happens to it? The flag tends to kind of fly with the wind. With the moving air, it tends to move from one place to another. So it kind of waves. What happens when you leave your hair open and suddenly switch on the fan? So you sit just under the fan and the fan is switched on. What happens to your free hair? Your hair tends to fly and it kind of comes over your face and all over it. It's kind of irritating. Now, what makes your hair fly? It's the moving air. It's the wind makes the hair fly. Try this out. Leave a book open and then keep it under the fan which is on. Switch on the fan and keep this book open just below the fan. What happens? You would see that the pages of the book get turned on their own. So you are not turning the pages. It's just happening on its own. But if there is no wind or if there is no moving air inside the room, that doesn't happen. So the pages remain where they are. But as soon as there is an air or a streak of air which is moving, so the pages also tend to move with the moving air. You must have noticed what happens to your clothes when you leave them to dry in the sun. During windy weather, they tend to fly away. In fact, if you do not clip them properly, they actually fly away with the wind. You keep your window panes open, you would see the curtains of the room flying with the wind. Or even if the window panes are closed, if you switch on the fan inside the room, that also makes the wind curtains wave. You would have also noticed, in case you are traveling from one city to another, you would have noticed amidst the green vast fields, you would have seen the windmills. So this is how they look like. So fan-like structure which keeps rotating like this. And what rotates it? Nobody is standing there to make it rotate. So they rotate with the wind. Whenever there is a gust of moving air, that makes these windmills rotate. And what are these windmills for? Do you know what is the purpose of having these windmills? So they are for a very useful purpose. So they help in generation of electricity. So that's how we harness the energy which is present in the moving air or wind. So in this lesson, we are basically going to talk more about wind. So we are going to talk about what is wind, what causes wind to blow, and what are the extreme versions of wind. Sometimes wind becomes so violent that it can cause huge destruction and loss of life as well as property. So we are going to look at all those destructive versions of wind when it becomes that violent, and we are also going to talk about the basics like what is wind, what causes wind to flow. So to start with, so even before we start with, when we talk about wind, something that comes to our mind immediately is the wind which blows just before a rainfall or after a heavy rain. What happens? You would see the trees, the leaves of the trees. In fact, sometimes if the wind is heavy enough, the branches of the tree, the entire tree tends to bend down. So even the slightest movement of air can be noticed in the leaves and branches of plants, because the leaves of the plants, they are very light and they get easily moved by a little bit of air which is moving. But when the winds become very intense, then sometimes it is accompanied by thunder as well as storms. They become scary and they are the ones which cause destruction of life and property. So let us now learn what causes these natural phenomena like wind, storms, cyclones, etc. So before that, let us understand what is wind. So based on the examples which I listed in the previous slides, I hope you are able to understand what is wind. It is nothing but moving air. So this is the simple definition of wind. So a lot of times people think that, sometimes people are not able to distinguish between wind and air. They think both of them sound similar, but actually they are not similar. So when air is static, that is air, which contains a lot of gases, a mixture of gases is air. But when the same air is moving from one place to another, we call it a wind. So wind is nothing but moving air. So think of wind. Obviously, in the nature, you have wind, which we see, which makes the trees move, which makes our hair fly. So even inside a room, you can feel wind, you can feel the movement of air. So if you are sitting quite inside the room, assuming that the fan is switched off. Now what happens when you switch on the fan? So the free hair which was kept open and which was static, they all start moving now. So the hair tends to get tangled and they get blown by the wind. So what do you understand from this? This shows that air, when it is not moving, it is not capable of making other objects move. As you can see here air was present around this lady, but the air was not moving and therefore it could not make the hairs move. But in the next scenario, when the air was moving, so that moving air has enough energy to make these hairs also fly with it. So that means wind has some sort of energy because of which it can make other objects move. And these movements are seen either in terms of turning of the pages of the book, or the waving of the flag, or the movement of the leaves of trees. So those are the various movements and they are all caused by wind. Now the question is, does air have so much of strength to cause these changes? Because these are all noticeable changes. Whether you talk about the movement of the hair, or you talk about the pages of your book which gets turned on which are turned on its own due to wind, or you talk about the movement of different parts of the plant. So all these movements happen because some sort of force applies on these objects. So that means that when air moves, it has some sort of energy, it has some sort of strength because of which it can make other objects move. So that's quite interesting. It sounds interesting. So let us see how exactly, or what property of air helps the movements of objects. So here we will talk about this surprising yet beautiful concept that air exerts pressure. Now since air exerts pressure, this pressure makes a lot of things move along with the moving air. Just think of these scenarios. Have you ever seen that when you are trying to run, and if wind is also blowing in the same direction, what happens? You feel as if the wind is pushing you and is helping you to run in that direction. Like in this case, forget about the wind. Let's take another example. Let's say that you have come out for a walk with your pet. Now if your pet is running in this direction, it is kind of pushing you in the same direction, so it becomes easier for you to run in the same direction. Similarly, if wind is also blowing in this direction, so it supports you all the more. So basically air is exerting a pressure on you, because of which it is becoming easier for you to run in the same direction. When you ride a bicycle, so riding a bicycle is also easier when you are trying to ride it in the same direction as the wind. So let's say you are riding in this direction, the wind is also blowing in this direction. So the wind will actually give a pressure, or it will exert a force on you in the same direction, which will make your riding easier. Flying a kite. So when you fly a kite, if the wind again is in the same direction, it becomes easier for you, because wherever direction you want your kite to go, by exerting very little force you are able to do that. But imagine a situation where the reverse thing is happening. Let's say you are trying to fly the kite in this direction, but there is a wind which is blowing in this direction. So basically the wind is trying to oppose the movement of the kite. So you need to apply more force. So it will need more effort from your side to fly a kite in a direction opposite to that of the wind. The same thing holds true when you are sailing a boat. So if you are in the direction of the wind, it helps. Your sail becomes easier. But the same thing if you do it in the opposite direction, it becomes difficult. Now, whenever you are moving along the direction of the wind, you are seeing that you need to put less effort. That's because air is also putting in some pressure. So the moving air is also exerting some pressure either on you or on the boat or on your kite or on the bicycle. So in all these cases, if you look at these examples, you get to know that yes, to some extent the statement is true that air can exert pressure. So let us try to perform some experiments. So in these experiments, we will actually prove that yes, air do exert pressure. Now try this out yourself. Take a glass, fill it with water up to the brim. So it's like completely filled with water. Now you take a cardboard or maybe a thick sheet of paper and put that cardboard, place it over the glass as I have placed it here. So this is the cardboard or maybe a thick sheet of paper, and this glass is filled with water up to the brim. So it's completely full with water, right? So now we will see a magic will happen. So what you have to do next is turn the glass upside down. So just turn it upside down quickly and take your hands away. So you are just holding it from here, so your hand is not there at the bottom. So what should have happened? What do we normally expect? We normally expect that the cardboard should fall off. That's because we have not stuck it to the glass. So there is no glue between the cardboard and the glass. But the magic that happens here is the cardboard still sticks to the glass. It stays at the same place even when we have removed our hands. So that's almost like a magic. But this is not really magic. There is a science behind it. Do you know why does this happen? This happens because, now if the card is staying here, that means there is some pressure which is being exerted in this direction because of which it is staying here. But our hand is not there. So our hand is not exerting any pressure. Then what? So it is basically the pressure which is exerted by the air in the atmosphere. So in the surroundings, air is present everywhere. So basically the atmospheric pressure which is exerted on this card is greater than the pressure which is exerted by the water which is present inside the glass. Now since this pressure is more, therefore the card remains there. So this atmospheric pressure forces the card to stick to the glass. So you see, here you get to know that atmospheric pressure exists. Because of its existence, this magic happened. So this is one simple yet beautiful experiment which you can carry out at your place also. Let's look at another example. Now, when you say drink anything, juice, cold drink, so how do you sip with a straw? How do you drink it with a straw? So as you sip through the straw, the liquid comes through the straw. It comes to your mouth. Now, if you try to understand this concept that how the straw works, so that also sounds quite interesting. Because you see, we say that all the objects get attracted towards the gravity. So every object has a tendency to fall towards the ground. But in case of straw, as you just try to pull it, the liquid comes from bottom to the top. So how does this movement of the liquid happens? So let us try to understand this. So when I look at this glass of liquid with the straw, so when the straw is sitting in the glass, so nobody is sipping, so you are not sipping. As long as you do not sip through the straw, the liquid is not going to come inside your mouth. Now when the straw is just simply sitting in the glass, what happens? Pressure which exists on the surface of this liquid is same all over. So everywhere, here, everywhere, the pressure is the same. Nobody is exerting any extra pressure anywhere. So when I talk about this pressure, I'm also talking about the pressure which exists on the little bit of surface inside the straw. So when you look at the straw, this surface of the straw, it also has the same pressure which is there, which exists at this level of the liquid. Correct? Now what happens when we suck the air out of the straw. So when we suck the air, so basically we are taking in some air from the straw inside our mouth, right? So basically when we suck, the air pressure inside the straw decreases. So inside the straw, the air pressure decreases. So now what happens? The pressure outside the straw is more than the pressure inside the straw. So here the pressure is more and here the pressure is less. So this pressure, since the pressure is more here, so basically here the air will exert some pressure on the liquid, and this pressure will force the liquid to move up through the straw. So basically it is due to the difference in pressure inside the straw and outside the straw which forces the liquid to move up the straw when the straw is being sucked. As long as the straw is not sucked, the liquid will not move up through the straw. So basically what happens here is pressure outside the straw is greater than pressure inside the straw. And why does this happen? This happens because we have sucked in the air from inside the straw. So air itself, we have taken it. So now when we have taken up the air, so obviously the air pressure has reduced inside. So that's the reason how the pressure difference is created. And wherever there is a pressure difference, so it is something like this. So from this side you have this much of pressure, whereas from this side you just have this much pressure. So if you have an object here, so overall the object will experience a pressure in this direction, right? Because more pressure is being exerted in this direction. So the same thing holds true here. Since the pressure outside is more, therefore the liquid is like it moves up through the straw due to that increased pressure outside. So with these two experiments, we got to know that yes, air pressure exists. So there is a pressure which is being exerted by the air. So that is kind of proved. Now, how exactly air pressure controls the movement of air? Because movement of air is wind. So basically we are trying to see that how is wind related to air pressure. Now, what happens is increased wind speed is accompanied by decreased air pressure. This is a very important concept of air pressure. Now, what do we mean when we say increased wind speed? What is wind? Nothing but moving air. When air is moving, that is wind. Now, what would determine the speed of the wind? Speed of the wind is nothing but the speed with which the particles which are present in the air are moving. So when I say increased wind speed, I basically mean to say that the particles in the air or the air particles are moving faster. So that is the increased wind speed. So those particles in the air, wherever they move very fast, it causes a decrease in air pressure. Now, you might be wondering that how is speed related to pressure? Let's look at this example. So, I am going a little out of track to explain you the relationship between wind speed and air pressure. So, look at this scenario where you see it's like a queue of children. They are standing in a queue and you would see that they are like moving one after another. So they are all moving one after another. So each of them have enough time to say ring the bell. So every time they move ahead, they have to ring a bell. Now since they are moving comparatively slowly, so they have enough time to ring the bell. Now instead, if you have another scenario where the same bunch of students, they move, but they moved really fast. Now when they moved this fast, each of them hardly had any time to ring the bell in between, because they were in a huge hurry. So when they are in so much of hurry, they did not have time to ring the bell in between, right? So what was the difference that you observed in these two scenarios? So in the first scenario, since each of the child is moving slowly, so they have enough time to ring the bell. In the second scenario, each child is moving very fast, so they do not have time to ring the bell. So the same thing happens here. So when I talk about wind speed, we are talking about the air particles. So here each of these child, they represent air particles. So these are like one air particles. So when air particles are moving slowly, that means the wind speed is less. So they have enough time to exert pressure on objects, right? For example, when air moves, our hair starts flowing with the wind. That's because the particles in the air, as they move, they exert some pressure on our hair, and because of that the hair moves. So when the particles are moving comparatively slower, they have time to exert pressure on other objects. But when they are moving so fast, they hardly have any time to exert pressure on anything. So basically when they are moving slowly, they are going to exert more pressure. So the air pressure is going to be more. But when they are moving very fast, they hardly have any time, and therefore they will exert little air pressure. So therefore increased wind speed is always accompanied by decreased air pressure. So in any region, if the wind speed has increased, so sometimes when during a bad weather, rain, after a heavy rain, sometimes you will see that wind speed is very high. So whenever the wind speed is high, the air pressure in that particular area decreases. So with this we get to know that when the speed is slow, so basically slow wind speed. So this was the example of slow wind speed, and slow wind speed would mean increased air pressure, because each of the particle has enough time to exert a lot of pressure. Whereas when the wind speed is very fast, so increased wind speed, so each particle doesn't have enough time to exert pressure. So therefore this would be accompanied by decreased air pressure. So let us try to apply the same concept to this example of the straw. So as I mentioned before, what happens when we suck through the straw? The liquid which is present inside the glass, it tends to come up through the straw, and that's how it enters our mouth. So here we will see another interesting concept associated with air pressure. So here if you see, the movement of air happens along the gradient, along a region of higher concentration towards a region of lower concentration. So what is this concentration which we are talking about? So basically, in this case, the movement of air, not only this case, so everywhere we will see that air always moves from a region of high pressure towards a region of low pressure. So this is another important property of air, or this is another important concept of air pressure. So therefore in this case also, if you look at it, when we suck, so we suck in the air from inside the straw. Therefore low pressure is created inside the straw. So inside the straw there is low pressure. So outside the straw there is high pressure. So air moves from region of high pressure towards region of low pressure, and that is why the liquid also moves with that air pressure. So basically the movement of the liquid also happens from outside the straw to inside the straw. So wherever air pressure is more, air will move from that area towards the area where air pressure is less. Now as air moves, so from this you understand that basically air moves only when there is a difference in pressure. When two regions have different pressures, only then air moves from region of high pressure towards region of low pressure. And this moving air is called wind. Now as wind moves, it exerts pressure on other objects and make them also move along with it. Therefore when we ride a bicycle in the direction of wind, we get an additional force, we get an additional support. Therefore we can ride it with minimum effort, because air is also exerting some pressure in the same direction. On the contrary, when we try to ride a bicycle opposite to the direction of wind, we need to apply a lot of extra effort. That's because the movement of wind is actually exerting an opposite force on us, and therefore it is opposing our motion. So in order to overcome that, we need to put that extra effort. So this is the concept of air pressure.